Hi, I'm Evelyn Lynn, the so-called heiress of the Lynn Group. People think I was born with everything money, power, the entire city at my fingertips, but if they knew what kind of poison I drank every night at the hands of the man I loved, they'd realize I had nothing at all. That night, beneath the golden chandelier of the banquet hall, the air was thick with perfume, false smiles, and whispered schemes. I stood beside my grandfather, clutching the hem of my dress as he raised his glass and smiled at the crowd of mentions of tycoons, future politicians, heirs to banks, and legacies of old wealth. "Evelyn," he said with a gentle, weathered tone, "today's your 24th birthday. Pick one among these gentlemen. Whoever you choose will lead the Lynn Group with you." All eyes turned to me, some smug, some calculating, a few even nervous. They weren't here, for Methi were here for the Empire. But I didn't look at a single one of them. My heart had already made its choice years ago. "Grandpa," I said, the word trembling in my throat, "I want to marry Ethan Jiang." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a gust of wind slashing through silk. Ethan, standing off to the side in the Armani suit I bought him last month, stiffened for a moment before walking forward. He looked so calm, so noble in that moment. But I knew what lay beneath that mask. He bowed slightly, respectful to my grandfather. "Mr. Lynn," he began, his voice steady and sharp, "I appreciate your trust, and I know Evelyn cares deeply for me. But my heart belongs to someone else." My ears rang as whispers exploded around the room. My breath caught in my chest. Ethan turned to look at the woman standing silently in the back, her black silk dress clinging to her body like a second skin. "Euron." "I'm with Euron," he continued. "We've been together for years. If I can't give her a name, I won't marry anyone at all." The room went from shocked to chaotic. I could feel the oxygen drain from the air. My grandfather's expression darkened, the cane in his hand striking the floor with a thunderous thud. Even the most indifferent guests now stared with wide eyes. To reject the Lynn family in public wasn't just bold. It was lunacy. But Ethan wasn't finished. "Evelyn and I grew up together. I owe her a lot. If she insists, I'll marry her, but Euron must live with us. I won't abandon her. We'll hold a ceremony for Euron too, even if there's no legal marriage certificate." A heavy silence followed. My grandfather's lips thinned. "How outrageous," he snapped. "How dare you make a mockery of our family name? I raised both of you, gave you shelter and education, and this is how you repay me." His anger made the room tremble. But Ethan didn't flinch. He looked at me Theno. He sneered and said with a voice soaked in disdain, "Why are you still standing there? You follow me around like a shadow. I gave you a chance. Shouldn't you be groveling by now? Go and calm your grandfather down. You've taken enough from Euron. If she weren't so forgiving, I'd never have married you in the first place." That was the moment I wanted to laugh. Not cry laugh. Because Shun Euron, the pitiful orphan my grandfather took in out of pity, had always acted like a guest, but plotted like a snake. My parents died when I was 13. Grandpa was too old to keep up with me, so we brought in Euron and Ethan to accompany me. At least, that was the excuse. But in truth, those two had been plotting from the beginning, pretending to be friends while digging their claws into everything I had. In my past life, I believed in love. I handed Ethan my heart, my trust, and eventually my entire inheritance. And in return, poison. Day after day, night after night, slow enough that I didn't notice until it was far too late. I remembered the last time clearly bleeding from every orifice while Ethan held Euron in his arms and kissed her lips as I choked on my own blood. "You brought this on yourself," he had said. "If you hadn't clung to me, Euron wouldn't have suffered all these years." The memory sliced into my chest like a cold blade. This time, I wouldn't cry. This time, I would rewrite the ending. My grandfather slapped Ethan across the face, so hard the room fell silent again. "Get out," he barked. "And take that seductress with you. Evelyn, he's no longer your problem. Handle this your way. Don't let me down." I lifted my chin, wiped away the emotion threatening to spill from my lashes, and gave my grandfather a calm smile. I've already chosen who I want to marry. The whole room froze. Even Ethan's face twitched. He was confused.
Smug.
Curious. But I wasn't looking at him. I glanced toward the farthest corner of the banquet hall, where a tall, sharply dressed man stood with his arms crossed, watching everything in silence. His name was Gabriel Chen. In my previous life, he was barely a whisper, an employee hidden in the background. I never noticed him. But now, I couldn't take my eyes off him. After the guests were dismissed and the noise died down, Grandpa led me into the study. I told him my plan. I whispered Gabriel's name. For a moment, Grandpa stared at me in disbelief. Then, with a slow, almost reluctant nod, he said, "If he agrees, I'll make the preparations." When I walked out again, Ethan was still standing there, arms folded, Euron clinging to his side like a ghost. She looked at me with crocodile tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you, sister," she whispered. "If my parents were still alive, they'd be so happy that I finally get to be with the man I love." Ethan rubbed her back comfortingly.
"You're too kind, Euron."
"She should be thanking you. If it weren't for your patience, I wouldn't have agreed to marry her." His voice turned cold when he looked at me. "Your father caused her parents' deaths. This is the least you can do for something in return." In my past life, that guilt crushed me. I tolerated everything she did, every intrusion, every theft. Only after my death did I learn the accident that killed her parents was no accident, it was her plan. Her price to infiltrate my family was her own blood. "Lin Shi," Ethan said, switching to his coaxing tone. "Euron has no background, no support. She'll be mocked once we get married. You understand, don't you? Give her something. Give her the shares." For a second, my world tilted. It wasn't just his words, it was the familiarity. The way he asked, the way he threatened. "Without those shares," I said slowly, "I have no voice in the company. I could be cast out entirely." Ethan frowned. "We're about to be married. Why are you still clinging to power? Give her the shares, and I'll make sure you're protected. If not, well, don't blame me later." I couldn't believe how brazen he was in this life. In the past, he at least masked his cruelty with charm.
Now, he didn't even try.
The temperature around us dropped. Euron shifted nervously, and Ethan looked ready to explode. Just then, a deep, calm voice broke the tension. "Miss Lin. Chairman Lin asked me to fetch you." I turned. Gabriel Chen stood at the threshold, the only person in the room whose face wasn't twisted with greed. Without hesitation, I walked to him. "Let's go." "Wait," Ethan snapped. "Why is he even talking to you?" "Because he's my future husband," I said. And I didn't bother to explain anything else. As I followed Gabriel through the corridor, my heels clicking against the marble like soft gunshots in the quiet tension of the Lin estate, I could feel Ethan's eyes burning into my back. But I didn't flinch. I had made my choicino. I had reclaimed my dignity. The man walking beside me wasn't dressed in a tailored designer suit, nor did he wear the smug expression of someone used to wealth and worship. Gabriel carried himself with a steady calm, his shoulders squared, his every step measured, like a man who knew exactly who he was, even if the world hadn't caught up yet. When we reached the garden courtyard, I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did Grandpa explain everything?" He looked at me with those dark, unreadable eyes, and something shifted like a veil lifted for a brief second. "Enough to know you're putting your trust in me," he said quietly. "And I won't betray it." His words weren't grand. No flowery promises. But there was something raw and grounding in the way he said them, like they were carved in stone. I pulled the red velvet box from my clutch and opened it, revealing the Lin family's seal, symbol of power, legacy, and authority. With fingers that trembled despite my steel resolve, I handed it to him. "From this moment on, you are the guardian of the Lin name," I said. "Not Ethan. Not anyone else." Gabriel didn't reach for it immediately. He looked at the seal, then at me, then slowly dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "Miss Lin," he said, his voice reverent, I, Gabriel Chin, swear on my name, my blood, and my future that if I ever betray you, may I never find peace for the rest of my life. The oath took me by surprise, not because of its drama, but because of its sincerity. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't calculated. I could feel it in my bones. This man had nothing, yet he offered me everything. I inhaled deeply and nodded. Then rise. From now on, you stand beside me, not beneath. As he stood, I could sense a subtle shift in him too, like something dormant had awakened. Maybe it was ambition. Maybe it was love. Or maybe, just maybe, it was destiny intertwining with mine. We returned to the main house only to find the staff in a flurry. My aunt, the one who'd raised me after my mother died, ran toward me with her apron still on, tears streaking down her weathered cheeks. "Miss Evelyn," she cried, gripping my arm. "They're pulling out your roses. The ones from your birthday is tearing them out." My heart dropped. Without thinking, I sprinted across the estate toward the backyard. As I turned the corner and saw the garden bed's me sanctuary reduced to dirt and snapped stems, something inside me cracked. The rose bushes were gone. The same ones I had planted when I was 10, with my mother's help, as a tribute to her memory. I had watered them every morning, whispered my secrets into their petals, and watched them bloom like a promise of permanence.
Now?
Uprooted, trampled, destroyed. Ethan stood in the center of the chaos, sleeves rolled up like he was performing an act of service, completely indifferent to the devastation. I stopped in my tracks, my voice low and sharp. "Why?" He turned, as if my presence annoyed him more than it embarrassed him. "They're just flowers," he said with a shrug. "Euron likes roses. You'll plant roses now." My fingers curled into fists. "This is my home," I said, the words vibrating with fury. "I choose what grows here. If Euron wants roses, she can plant them in her own yard if she ever gets one." For a moment, a flash of something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe. Or perhaps just the sting of being reminded he still lived off our family's charity, a driver's son who clawed his way into the main house. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Instead, he snarled, "Everything you own is mine, Evelyn. I've already made arrangements. You should be grateful. If you irritate me again, I might just call off the wedding." "Then what? Beg me to stay?" He leaned in slightly, like a predator testing the cage door. "Be smart, Evelyn. Let me protect you. I'll even let you carry my son first. Isn't that what you want?" That's when my self-control snapped. I shoved him hard, the venom in my voice cutting like a blade. "Protect me? You poison me in one life, uproot my memories in another, and call it protection." Ethan stumbled back, stunned. "You're delusional," he hissed. "You'll regret this." I straightened my spine and gave him a cold, slow smile. "You're right. I regret saving you from poverty. I regret trusting you. But the biggest regret? That I didn't bury you and your lies along with those roses." I turned on my heel, my heels crushing the trampled petals like ashes beneath my feet. Behind me, he didn't say another word. Not yet. Because deep down, I think even he realized something had changed. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the moonlight filtering through the sheer curtains. My mind was racing, but oddly, my heart was calm. I had chosen my path, and I had allies now. Gabriel was no longer just a name in the payroll ledger, was the stone I'd cast into still waters. The ripples had already begun. 3 days later, the quarterly board meeting arrived. The conference room was a sleek battlefield of dark suits, sharp voices, and high-stakes glances. Ethan arrived in full force, flanked by Euron in a pearl-white dress that tried too hard to look innocent. The moment he saw me, he smiled like we shared a secret. "Evelyn," he said, approaching with the arrogance of a man who thought the war was already won. "Leave this to me. After today, we'll be unstoppable." I said nothing, simply watched as his gaze flicked past me and landed on Gabriel, standing at my side in a tailored navy suit that made him look like he was born to lead. Ethan's smile froze. Then, like a shark smelling blood, He stormed over, eyes locking on the red seal Gabriel carried.
How dare you, he spat.
That seal belongs to me. Gabriel didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. No, he said calmly. It never did. And in that moment, as Ethan clenched his fists and Euron's hand slipped nervously into his, I knew the real war had just begun. The conference room pulsed with tension, every breath heavier than the last, every movement sharp-edged like drawn blades in a velvet-lined arena. Gabriel stood beside me, calm and unreadable, the Lynn family seal resting in his gloved hands like a quiet declaration of war. Across the room, Ethan seethed, his perfectly styled hair slightly out of place, his expression contorted in a blend of disbelief and wounded pride. "Where did you get that seal?" he demanded, his voice rising just enough to make the senior shareholders glance at each other with veiled curiosity. "That's not a toy, you can't just flash it around like a magic trick." Gabriel met his gaze without blinking, his tone as smooth as chilled steel. "It was entrusted to me by Miss Lynn herself, in the presence of Chairman Lynn. If you have doubts, you're welcome to bring them up under oath." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Euron, standing behind Ethan like a wilted gardenia, stiffened. She clutched her little designer purse like it was a lifeline, her eyes darting from Gabriel to me, her lips trembling but silent. I watched Ethan's face shift, muscle by muscle, from anger to calculation, then to something resembling panic masked as indignation. "You think you're clever," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "But I gave you everything. Don't forget who taught you how this boardroom works." I tilted my head, smiling slightly. "And don't forget who gave you a seat at the table in the first place." His face twitched. He hated that I could speak so evenly, that I could match his venom without breaking a sweat. But this wasn't just about business. This was about dignity, mine, which he crushed, and his, which he thought he still possessed. Then, like a final insult wrapped in tinsel, Euron stepped forward and whispered, "Brother, it's okay. Let's not cause a scene here. We can still talk it out after the meeting." Her voice was sugar-laced pity, but her eyes glimmered with something else, fear, perhaps, or a fragile hope that this house of cards she'd helped build wouldn't collapse today. Ethan turned toward her, his expression softening. "You're right. I shouldn't lower myself." But his pride couldn't help one last jab. "You know how Evelyn gets when she's emotional. Let's just get this over with." The meeting began. My grandfather entered with his usual slow grace, supported by his cane and followed by his assistant. Every shareholder in the room stood. He nodded at me once, just once, and took his place at the head of the table. Gabriel and I sat down quietly. Ethan and Euron sat across from us, a little too close together to appear professional. I noted the way the older shareholders subtly turned their chairs away from them, the way eyes shifted every time Euron giggled too loudly or whispered into Ethan's ear. And then, just as the first voting agenda was presented, Euron pulled a crisp folder from her purse. "Chairman Lynn," she said sweetly, "if I may, I'd like to submit a personal asset transfer agreement to support Ethan. I know my background isn't impressive, but I wanted to do my part." For a split second, the room paused. Grandpa raised an eyebrow. One of the older directors leaned over to read the document, his nose wrinkling slightly. "Miss Shun," he said slowly, "this is commendable. But with all due respect, the total valuation here isn't enough to buy even 1% of Lynn Group stock." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Euron bit her lip and cast her eyes downward, playing her role perfectly. Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand as if she had made a sacrifice worthy of a crown. "It's not about value," he said grandly. "It's about loyalty. Trust. She's giving all she has." And then, with the arrogance of a man who truly believed the room revolved around him, Ethan stood up, buttoned his blazer, and addressed the board. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pacing with faux humility, "I propose a restructuring. I'm willing to assume control of all Lynn Group operations, streamlining leadership under one vision. Mine." The audacity of the statement hung in the air like smoke. You could feel the ripple of confusion, the wave of disbelief. One man cleared his throat. Another looked at Grandpa, whose face remained impassive, but his fingers curled ever so slightly around the handle of his cane. I didn't move. I didn't interrupt. I just watched Ethan dig his own grave, word by word, ambition dripping from every syllable like honey laced with arsenic. Evelyn has done her best, he said, gesturing to me, but it's time for new energy. Unified leadership. With my experience and vision, I can take Lin Group to new heights. When he finally finished, the room didn't erupt into applause. It didn't even hum with approval. It went cold. Grandpa stood slowly, leaning on his cane, his voice low and lethal. Mr. Jiang, he said, do you take us all for fools? You insult my granddaughter, condescend to this board, and yet you expect a unanimous vote in your favor? Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. You've overplayed your hand, Grandpa said, turning to the others. Let us vote. One by one, the hands went up, and none of them belonged to Ethan. His face turned a shade paler with each count. When the final vote tallied, it was a landslide against him. Euron gripped his arm tightly, whispering something frantically into his ear. But he didn't hear her. His eyes were locked on me. Evelyn, he said through clenched teeth. You were supposed to help me. I stood, finally, and stepped forward just enough for him to see me clearly. You were supposed to love me. The words hit him harder than I expected. For the first time, his posture faltered. The mask cracked. He was no longer the composed manipulator. He was just a man who had bet everything on a woman's silence and lost. The meeting adjourned. Grandpa dismissed everyone with a wave. Gabriel and I lingered for a moment. Ethan didn't move. Euron was the one who spoke next, her voice strained. Sister, please, don't be so cruel. We were only trying to survive. You have everything, but we just wanted a chance. I looked at her with a kind of pity I didn't even know I was capable of. Then you should have asked. Not stolen. Not lied. Not killed. Her eyes widened at the last word. Good. Let her wonder what I knew. Let the truth curl in her mind like a growing shadow. As Gabriel and I left the conference room, I heard Ethan's voice behind me one last time. Evelyn, you'll regret this. I didn't look back. I simply smiled and whispered under my breath. No. I'm finally free. The day after the board meeting felt oddly quiet, as if the whole estate was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do next. I sat in the sunroom, surrounded by the filtered light streaming through lace-curtained windows, sipping tea that had long gone cold. Outside, the garden crew worked in silence, restoring the beds where my roses once bloomed. I didn't ask them to replant. Not yet. Some losses deserved space to breathe before they were replaced. My fingers traced the rim of the porcelain cup, mind drifting back to Ethan's final words in that conference room. You'll regret this. Regret? No. What I felt was an unsettling sort of stillness, like the moment right before a summer storm, when the sky turns electric and the world seems to hush. Something was coming. I just didn't know which direction it would strike from. That evening, Grandpa summoned me to his study. The room smelled like aged leather and sandalwood, same as it always had, the tall shelves filled with memories and legacy. He looked up from his desk as I entered, eyes sharper than usual. You handled yourself well, he said simply. The board respects decisiveness. I gave a slight nod, waiting. He tapped the desk once with a single finger. Now tell me the truth. Why him? The question landed like a stone on water. I knew who he meant, Gabriel. Because he doesn't want the company, I said. He doesn't crave control. He doesn't wear his loyalty like a mask. He's quiet but honest. Grandpa studied me for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. You've changed, Evelyn. I had to, I replied. You don't survive betrayal by staying the same. A long pause followed, heavy and unspoken. At last he said, if this is truly your decision, I'll support the marriage. Relief slid through me like a sigh I didn't realize I'd been holding. Thank you, Grandpa. But be careful, he added, his tone suddenly grave. A man like Gabriel, he will draw out enemies. People won't understand your choice. They'll think you've gone mad. I smiled faintly. Then let them. The next morning, the entire city seemed to wake up to the news. Social media buzzed with speculation. Heiress Evelyn Lynn betrothed to a low-level employee? Lynn Group's next son-in-law not from the elite. The articles piled up like fallen leaves. Reporters camped near the gates. Aunt May, the family housekeeper, kept bringing me her phone to show me the ugliest headlines, clearly expecting outrage. But I felt none. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Because the more they watched me, the less they looked at the ones who had truly schemed. And I needed that blind spot. What I didn't expect, though, was Ethan to show up again so soon. He waited for me at the front garden like he still belonged there, leaning against the stone archway as if the past few days hadn't happened. Shin-Yuran was at his side, eyes swollen from tears, clutching his arm like her life depended on it. When I stepped outside, Ethan broke away from her without hesitation. "Evelyn," he began, using that old voice, soft, low, almost intimate. "I've been thinking." "Dangerous habit," I said flatly, continuing past him. He blocked my path. "I know things got out of hand. But you and we were meant to be. You can feel it. I know you can." I glanced at Yuran, whose face was rapidly turning pale. She was clearly not expecting this turn. "She's pregnant," I said, not as a question, but as a statement. Ethan's jaw twitched. "That doesn't matter. It changes nothing between us." Yuran's breath caught. "Brother," she whispered, voice cracking. I said a lot of things," Ethan snapped, not even sparing her a glance. "None of them matter now. Evelyn's the one I want." I laughed, then not loudly, not cruelly, just with the quiet amusement of someone who had finally pulled the curtain back and seen the puppet strings. "You know what's funny, Ethan?" I said, tilting my head. "You think this is about love. You think you can say the right words and everything will reset. But this isn't a fairy tale, and I'm not your backup plan. You lost me. Not yesterday. Not at the boardroom. You lost me the moment you chose to poison me and kiss her while I bled to death." His face went slack with confusion. What are you talking about?" "Oh, you don't remember?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Then let me remind you. I remember everything. Every pill. Every sip of tainted tea. Every lie whispered in the dark." Panic flickered in his eyes, the kind that doesn't come from guilt but from exposure. "You're lying." "Am I?" I whispered. "Then prove it. Look me in the eye and swear that you never meant to kill me." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Just like in that boardroom. Just like always. Yuran pulled at his sleeve. "She's crazy. Don't listen to her." But Ethan looked at Miralai, looked in. I knew in that moment he finally understood. He wasn't dealing with a naive girl who had once cried over his broken promises. He was facing a woman who remembered death and chose vengeance instead. I walked past him without another word. This time he didn't follow. That night, as I stood by my window watching the rain blur the city lights, Gabriel entered my room with a file in his hand. "These are the revised asset agreements," he said. "I've included a notarized prenuptial draft. You'll see I've waived any claim to Lynn Group Holdings." I turned to look at him, really look. Rainlight painted his face in silver and shadow. "Why are you doing all this?" I asked. "You don't owe me anything." He hesitated. Then, quietly, "Because I made a promise a long time ago. To myself. That if I ever had the chance to stand beside you, I would never let you fall again." My heart stirred just slightly. "Even if it means giving up everything?" He smiled faintly. "I've lived with nothing before. But with you, I feel whole." I reached for his hand. "Then let's show them what two people with nothing to hide can build together." Outside, the rain fell harder. But inside, for the first time in years, I felt warm, solid, safe. And as I leaned my head against Gabriel's shoulder, I realized the war might not be over, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting it alone. The morning of our wedding, The sky stretched wide and cloudless, painted in a shade of blue too perfect to be real, as if the universe had finally decided to reward me for surviving everything it had thrown at me. The air smelled of fresh roses Gabriel had arranged for 10 miles of red silk and crimson petals to trail from the Lynn estate to the hotel, a modern fairy tale stitched into reality, and for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to feel
happy.
not the trembling, cautious kind of happiness that fears being taken away, but something sturdier, grounded, almost defiant. I stood before the mirror in my white gown, fingers brushing over the veil that shimmered like mist, a quiet laugh escaping me as I read the note Gabriel had secretly tucked into my bouquet. No poison today unless it's from your lips. His humor, subtle and dry, always arrived when I needed it most. My bridesmaid poked her head in with a nervous grin. Evelyn, you might want to come see this. I turned, brow raised. What now? She hesitated, then whispered, Ethan's blocking the road. With an entire convoy. I froze, staring at her reflection behind me. Then I exhaled slowly, setting the note aside with deliberate care. Of course he is. We stepped outside, and the scene unfolding at the estate gates was laughable if it wasn't so pathetically theatrical. Ethan stood there in a navy tuxedo, flanked by a line of black SUVs decorated with red ribbons, as if he were the groom. As if any of this still belonged to him. Cameras flashed from behind trees and parked cars. Neighbors had gathered on the sidewalks like they were watching a parade. I saw Shunyuran first. She was already crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks, clinging to Ethan's arm like a child about to be abandoned. Brother, she sobbed, you promised. You said I was your bride. Are you marrying me today? Her voice cracked like a dry leaf underfoot, but Ethan didn't even blink. With a fluid motion, he peeled her off him and stepped toward me, holding out a velvet box. Evelyn, he said, voice oozing with practiced warmth, I'm here to marry you. I stared at him, utterly unmoved. Excuse me? I know I was wrong, he continued, as if we were having a private conversation and not standing in front of 24 strangers. But I never stopped loving you. I've come to make things right. Forget everything. We can start over. He opened the ring box, revealing a diamond so large it looked like a bribe carved in stone. I didn't even glance at it. Is this a joke? I asked flatly. Shunyuran stepped forward again, her voice shrill. Brother, what about me? You said I was the only one. That your marriage to Evelyn was fake, just a strategy. Ethan waved her off like an insect. You were useful, he snapped. But look where that got us. Evelyn is the Lynn heir. She's the only one who matters now. The words, spoken so casually, lit something in her. Euron's face twisted, her body trembling as she screamed, You bastard, and slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the air, like a gunshot. Ethan barely reacted. His eyes were still locked on me. Evelyn, he said again, his voice softer now, almost pleading. You know me. You know we belong together. I took one step forward, just enough so he could see the disgust in my eyes.
Doi.
I said, each word sharp enough to draw blood. Because the man I knew poisoned me while holding someone else in his arms. The man I knew watched me die without flinching. And you think you can erase that with a ring and some theatrics? The crowd around us had fallen silent. Even the reporters had stopped snapping pictures. Ethan swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly now. I was afraid. I was stupid. But I've changed. No, I said coldly. You've just run out of options. I turned to the guards. Escort them out. And next time he shows up, call the police. As the guards stepped forward, Ethan panicked. He dropped the ring box and lunged, grabbing my wrist. Evelyn, don't do this. You can't marry him's nobody. I'm the one who loves you. Then love me from a distance, I said, yanking my hand free. Love me in silence. Love me as I walk away with a man who never had to break me to realize my worth. Shunyuran collapsed to the ground, sobbing hysterically. Then suddenly, she clutched her stomach and gasped. Blood spread beneath her like a dark cloud on snow. Someone screamed. "She's losing the baby." Ethan's face drained of all color. "What baby?" he croaked. "You're pregnant." "I told you." Euron screamed. "You said it didn't matter." "You said," but she couldn't finish. The ambulance arrived moments later. Paramedics rushed her onto a stretcher, and I stood there, unmoved, watching the woman who had once watched me bleed. Ethan turned back to me one last time, broken and desperate.
Please, don't leave me like this.
I felt Gabriel's presence before I saw him. He stepped beside me, gently placing his hand on the small of my back. "She won't be leaving you," he said, voice low but lethal. "You were already left behind." We walked away together, leaving chaos in our wake, and I didn't look back. Not even once. The ceremony resumed without delay. When I stepped into the hotel ballroom, draped in silver and white, music swelling, guests rising to their feet, I felt the quiet click of a new chapter beginning. Gabriel met me at the altar, his expression unreadable, but his eyes warm. When he took my hand, I knew this wasn't a fantasy. This was my choice. My rebirth. And as we exchanged vows beneath a chandelier of crystal and light, I whispered two words that finally felt like truth. "I do." The wedding night was quiet, not the kind born from exhaustion, but the kind where every sound feels more meaningful, more alive, as if the world around us was holding its breath in reverence. I sat at the edge of the bed in a soft silk robe, the bridal gown carefully draped over a velvet armchair, watching Gabriel fumble with his cufflinks like a man 10 years younger. His hands, so sure when guiding boardroom deals or guarding me in silence, now trembled just slightly, betraying the storm he kept locked behind that calm face. I couldn't help it. I laughed.
Softly. Genuinely.
It bubbled out of me like spring water breaking through stone. He looked up at me, startled. "What?" I tilted my head. "You look like you're about to ask for a quarterly report, not kiss your wife." Gabriel chuckled, ears going a faint shade of pink. "I didn't think you'd be nervous," he murmured, stepping closer. "You've always seemed unshakable." I reached for his hand and pulled him down to sit beside me. "And yet you're the one who shook the entire Lynn group by showing up in a plain suit and stealing the bride." He smiled, but I caught the shadow in his eyes. "Can I ask you something?" he said, voice quiet, like he was asking the question not just with words, but with every breath he took. "Go ahead. When your grandfather said you wanted to marry me, why didn't you hesitate?" I turned my head slowly, taking him in the man who never once demanded anything from me, who never asked to be chosen, who only ever waited. "Because I remembered," I said simply. "It just took a lifetime to do it." His brows furrowed, and I reached up, fingers brushing his cheek. 10 years ago. A rainy afternoon. I gave my umbrella to a boy crying outside the school gates. He went still, eyes widening. "You remember that?" "I do now." My voice caught at the edges. "You looked so small, so lost, soaked to the bone. I gave you my last dollar and told you to study hard, that you'd make something of yourself." I never expected that boy to grow into the man standing in front of me now. Gabriel didn't speak for a moment, his throat moving as he swallowed back emotion. "That day saved me," he finally said. "I was homeless. My parents had died. I hadn't eaten in days. I thought maybe it would be easier to disappear." His voice cracked just slightly. "But your words, your kindness, they lit something in me. I kept going because I wanted to prove that I deserved to live." "You've done more than prove it," I whispered. "You've rewritten the end of a story I thought was already finished." He reached out and cupped my face, his touch reverent, grounding. "Evelyn, I love you. Not for what you gave me. Not for what you represent. But because you're you fierce, flawed, beautiful, relentless. And I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." I leaned in, letting my forehead rest against his. "Then start now," I whispered. "Call me wife." His breath hitched. "Wife." My heart trembled. We kissed slowly, deeply, like two souls learning the shape of each other again. That night wasn't about passion or conquest. It was about healing. It was about coming home. Days passed like petals falling from a blooming flower, quiet, effortless, touched by something that felt like grace. I spent mornings pruning what was left of my garden, letting new green shoots take root. Evenings were spent beside Gabriel, reading, planning, dreaming out loud for the first time in years. And then, one afternoon, Aunt May found me under the veranda. "Miss Evelyn," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if sharing state secrets. "We received news." I looked up. Her tone told me everything before she spoke. "Shen escaped." I put down my teacup slowly. "Escaped from where?" "The psychiatric facility in the countryside. Your grandfather had her committed for her own safety after everything. But she ran off. Took the nurse's uniform. No one's seen her since." I didn't move. My fingers stayed wrapped around the porcelain. "And Ethan?" "Worse off," she muttered, clearly satisfied. "After losing everything, he spiraled. Tried working, but he snapped at his boss, broke things. Got fired. Last we heard, he was loading boxes in a warehouse for minimum wage. Someone saw him fighting a stranger over $20. I stared out at the garden. A butterfly fluttered past, unaware of the chaos humans invented for themselves. "Let him rot," I said, softly. "Let them both drown in the silence they gave me." That evening, when Gabriel returned from a long day at the office, I met him at the door with a smile. He looked tired, but the moment he saw me, it melted into warmth. "Rough day?" I asked, taking his briefcase. "Nothing your face can't fix," he murmured, and pulled me into a hug. In his arms, I realized I no longer needed vengeance to feel powerful. I no longer needed anyone to bleed for me to believe I'd won. The past was behind me, tattered, burned, buried, and what stood before me was something rare, something real. Love, not born from fantasy or manipulation, but from quiet loyalty and earned trust. "Did you miss me?" he teased as we settled into the sofa. I raised an eyebrow. "I didn't. But you did." He grinned, kissing my forehead. "Every minute." We sat like that until the sky turned deep with dusk, and for once, I felt no ghosts in the room. Only the echo of a promise made and kept. This wasn't the ending of a tragedy. It was the beginning of the life I was always meant to live with, the man who never needed to steal the spotlight because he was always standing behind it, waiting for me to see him. And now I finally did.